things humans were never meant to see.
Man avoids shockwave by going underwater. Meteor turns night into day. A crab swimming. Forest breathing.
Goat born with one eye.
Do not help this man. In the film Lost Dog by Burt Milroad, a man helps his friend Aaron search for his dog Lucy. However, Aaron is not who he seems. It turns out he never had a dog. As he starts to transform into a skinwalker, he warns the man to run before it's too late. But why does Aaron try to spare him? He clearly lured him into the woods to feast, yet he had a change of heart at the last minute. If he asked you for help,
Crazy history facts that school did not teach you. In the 16th century, it was common to wear live mice as accessories. A cow named Pauline was the first cow to fly in an airplane in 1930. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, was Greek and not Egyptian. The word sabotage comes from French workers throwing their wooden shoes, called sabots, into machinery to disrupt production. Ancient Egyptians practiced a form of birth control that involved the use of crocodile dung. Sir Isaac Newton once stuck a needle in his eye to test his theory of color. The first words ever said on a telephone were by Alexander Graham Bell in 1876, and they were, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." 12 more.
Facts that will mess with your perception of time. Nelson Mandela died in 2013, meaning he could have played all GTA games and still be up to date. We made it to the moon only 66 years after the first controlled human flight. Harvard University was founded before Isaac Newton published his laws of motion and gravity. The Stegosaurus was older to the T-Rex than the T-Rex is to us. The Great Pyramids were older to the people of the Roman Empire than the Romans are to us. Vincent van Gogh's A Starry Night was painted the same year Nintendo was founded 1889. Spain was still a fascist dictatorship the year Microsoft was founded 1975. And Frank and Martin Luther King Jr. were born in the same year, 1929. Woolly mammoths were still alive when the Sphinx in Egypt was built and carved. Italy officially became country 25 years before Coca-Cola was invented. If the history of the universe were placed on a calendar year, humans would only exist starting around 11:59 p.m. on December 31st.
If you see someone with a face like this, run as fast as you can and don't look back. Oh shit.
What? What's wrong with you?
But before showing you the end of this video, I advise you to check if your phone is not being
This man, Frank Hayes, won his first and only horse competition as a jockey, even though he was dead. Let me explain. On June 4th, 1923, 22-year-old Frank was competing in a competition at Belmont Park in New York. And while competing, the crowd starts to go crazy because he and his horse beat the fan favorite that everybody thought was going to win. But during the race, nobody knew that Frank had a heart attack and died. And despite being dead, he managed to stay in his saddle long enough for the 20-to-1 long shot to jump the final fence and cross the finish line in first place. To quote the newspaper article directly, "As he crossed the finish line, a winner at last, his hands lost the reins, and he toppled from the back of Sweet Kiss. When they picked him up, Frank was dead." The exact cause of the heart attack remains unclear, but the reality is, as a jockey, he was responsible for cutting almost 10 pounds of body weight 24 hours before the competition. So I read that he ran repeatedly the morning of and denied himself of water. A week later, he was buried in the same uniform that he won his first and only race in. Overall, really sad case, he was so good. And as always, follow along if you're a fan of all things interesting and horrific.
Always be careful of the dead man walking.
Listen, a normal tornado, scary enough, but it's not nearly as scary as these guys, known as the Dead Man Walking tornadoes. This video that I was tagged in shows footage of something known as the Dead Man Walking tornado. You'll notice that there are two tornadoes here that have touched the ground, and this one right here almost looks like it has legs and it's walking. Now, we've covered plenty of terrifying tornadoes, including nocturnal ones or ones that happen at night, but none are quite the same as this. Dead man walking tornadoes occur when multiple vortexes are coming from the same exact storm system. When they're coming down from the clouds, it almost looks like legs that are walking. In the original clip here, you can see exactly what we're looking at. It does look like a person walking. And as it turns out, this name right here is very fitting because typically dead man walking tornadoes are extremely powerful, much more than just your average run-of-the-mill tornado. So if you see one of these, you better turn around and book it in the opposite direction.
Creepy Facts About U.S. Presidents, Part 1. Grover Cleveland was 49 when he married his 21-year-old bride, but not only that, he was known as an uncle to her entire life. Frances Clara Folsom was born in Buffalo, New York on July 21st of 1864. Her parents were Emma and Oscar Folsom. They would have another child in 1872, but unfortunately this child would pass in infancy. Frances's father was an attorney who worked with Grover Cleveland. In fact, Grover Cleveland was a huge part of Frances's life. He even bought her first baby carriage. Frances did grow up in a pretty stable household financially, but her dad had a pretty severe gambling problem, it seems, and he also really liked to help people, so he gave a lot of money away, and this would cause some financial struggles for the family. Unfortunately, in 1875, Frances's father would pass away in a carriage accident, but this would make Grover Cleveland the overseer of his entire estate, and he even became her unofficial guardian. Frances would go to good schools and get a pretty good education, but the entire time that she was in school, she kept in close contact with Grover Cleveland. When she didn't finish all of her education, Grover, who was the mayor of New York at the time, used his position to get her into another school, and the entire time he stayed in close contact with her. Frances did receive several engagement proposals from men that were her age. She did accept 2 of them, but they would end and they decided just to be friends. Even after becoming the president, Grover did keep in contact with Frances. Eventually, he would write to her in 1885 asking for her hand in marriage, to which she accepted. Before the wedding actually took place, Grover and her mother encouraged her to travel some, so she spent almost a year in Italy before coming home and then marrying Grover Cleveland. This marriage was very talked about in the media, with most of the media assuming that Grover Cleveland was going to marry her mother, so when it came out that it was actually Frances, it was kind of a shock. The president insisted on the wedding being a private ceremony with only 31 guests in attendance, and the media was strictly forbidden from coming in. They would then honeymoon in Maryland before coming back and having 2 receptions, one that was open to the public. During his time in the presidency, Grover would often take time to spend time with Frances, and she was adored by the media. She took a huge part in fighting for women's suffrage, and also she was a big part in starting kindergarten, so education was really high on her list of priorities. Frances was the only First Lady who would serve as the First Lady on 2 non-consecutive whatever. The word completely escaped me, but 2 non-consecutive presidencies. Grover and Frances would have 3 children together, and Frances was very much the kind of mother that wanted to spend time with her children. In fact, she was often talked about because she would get on the floor and play with her children, and apparently this was something they had never seen a First Lady do. And while Grover was sick during his presidency, Frances took it upon herself to write letters to excuse his absences and tried to help him in any way that she could. She took really good care of this man. When Grover passed away in 1908, she did mourn his loss pretty severely and then held a memorial service for him in 1909. And I might have said 1808, but he passed away in 1908. Frances refused to receive the pension that was legally hers. She refused to take that, but she did take the franking privilege to support her family. Frances would go on to remarry, and she remarried Thomas Preston, and it seemed like they had a pretty good relationship together too. While it does seem that Frances loved Grover Cleveland, it all seems really sketchy to me, like this was really inappropriate from the start, and he got in her head really early on. So it's really it is a disturbing fact. But what are your thoughts on this? Let me know down in the comments and follow for more weird things.